What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again talking college football. And today we're talking the week 1 Friday games. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. All that helps us a ton. So thank you if you've done it. If you have feedback, please leave it in the comments, whether it's about the games or about the show itself. Still trying to figure out the best way to format this. If you have suggestions or something you'd like to see, please let me know, taking everything into consideration. Last thing, if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. We're talking predictions for the games. That means sides, totals, everything else. Friday night, pretty nice 7-game slate. Western Michigan takes on Michigan State to kick things off. The spread is 21 points, 3 scores in favor of Michigan State, the home team. The total in the game is 49.5. So, interesting spot for Michigan State. We have the coaching continuity. The entire staff is back, at least among coordinators, head coach Jonathan Smith. Disappointing start. They were 5-7 last year. The team is sort of trailing previous regimes in terms of recruiting, talent acquisition, and it's led to a lackluster on-field product. But Jonathan Smith is a program builder. Now it's year 2. Looking to get off to a fast start against Lance Taylor, who's now 10-15 as head coach of Western Michigan. Only real change is they have a new DC this year. They were atrocious on defense last year, so that makes a lot of sense. As far as infrastructure goes, Western Michigan, they're going to be fairly run-heavy, I think, especially considering you're looking at 2 dual-threat quarterbacks splitting time, but they were already run-heavy last year. 40.5% pass rate was 118th. Very slow as well, 29 seconds per play. That was 120th. Michigan State was up at a 50.5% pass rate, 50.1. That was 47th. Expecting that to regress more towards balanced if Michigan State can stay in games a little bit more. They were also fairly slow. You have them at 28.3 seconds per play. That was 114th. So expecting a fairly slow game overall out of these two guys. As far as injuries go, Western Michigan's Cole Cabana, the Michigan transfer at running back, is out this week. And Nikai Martinez for Michigan State is a game-time decision. He's a defensive back. As far as the player personnel, with Michigan State, you have Aiden Childs at quarterback. Sort of a disappointing year in his first year at East Lansing. He's a former 4-star, but 59.5% completion percentage, 7.5 yards per attempt. Ton of turnover-worthy plays. He had 20. That was the biggest concern with his game, resulted in 11 interceptions. But he's 6'3", 217 pounds. He is somewhat mobile, 2.3 yards per carry on the ground. Part of the reason that was a little lower, 27 sacks. With that said, partially the O-line's fault. 38% pressure rate is atrocious, but he also held onto the ball for 3.1 seconds, which is one of the longer rates in the country. So overall, you get a 19% pressure to sack ratio. That's middling to below average. The whole story with Aiden Childs is you see the flashes, but you also have the negative plays. If he can clean up sacks and turnover-worthy plays, you could be looking at an ascension from a young 4-star. With Western Michigan, I'm just not sure what the quarterback room is going to look like. Indiana transfer Brock Lowry is going to split time with JUCO transfer Brady Jones, who's from Riverside Community College. He wasn't even ranked a 3-star. You're looking at dual threat quarterbacks on both ends, which last year Hayden Wolf was a complete statue, so the offense is probably going to look a little different. But regardless, this is a very weak quarterback group on paper, just in terms of talent. The edge has to go to Michigan State. Most of the edges are. We're talking about a MAC school on the other side. As far as skill position players, Michigan State's running back room is pretty weak after losing Karen Lynch-Adams and Nate Carter. They bring in Elijah Tolliver from Sac State. He never really had more than 66 carries in his first 3 years. He kind of breaks out last year, 182 carries, but his efficiency metrics were really bad, 2.8 yards after contact per attempt. I think he's probably going to get beat out at some point by Mekhi Frazier and Brandon Toulis, who are lower 3-stars and sophomores. They played 30 combined snaps last year. Running back room's a mess. Luckily, you're playing Western Michigan. That's probably a conversation for future days. At wide receiver, Nick Marsh is an absolute stud. They actually bolstered this unit with Amari Kelly from Middle Tennessee State, Krishawn McCray from Kent State, and a few others that I think could maybe contribute. But the real story is Jack Velling is back. He's probably your de facto wide receiver too, even though he plays tight end. He already had 411 yards and 36 catches last year. And it's just vastly, vastly different and better than what Western Michigan has. Basically, you're returning to Jalen Buckley because Jaden Nixon hit the portal. Buckley was fine in the MAC, 5.3 yards per carry, 15 catches, but we were really relying on Cabana to fill that Nixon role. He's out this game. And then the number one receiver they return is wind sprinter Malik Dodone, who had 230 yards. So now you're turning to transfers Baylon Brooks, Christian Leary, he's from Georgia Tech at least, Talik Williams from Georgia State. All of them are going to have to contribute right away. Blake Bosma's a decent tight end. Marion Herbowski, the former quarterback, changed positions to tight end. Maybe they play more 12 this year. I think optimistically you're hoping they just tread water at the skill position players, which I think is not the most likely. I think you're probably looking at a slight step back. Offensive lines, Michigan State was horrible last year. They lost 3 starters. They were actually good starters too. So this is kind of not a good ridden situation. Improvement by subtraction. Like Luke Newman got drafted. Tanner Miller was okay. So now you have Stanton Ramel, Ashton Lepo. They're back. They were liabilities. Christian Phillips is back after he got hurt immediately in week 1. Maybe he's an upgrade. Matt Gulburn from Wake Forest, Luka Vincic from Oregon State, Connor Moore from Montana State are all going to push to start. It's not a good O-line, but it should be better than what Western has on defense, expecting them to be able to run the ball and protect Childs. Western Michigan's taking a huge step back in the offensive line. They were 25th in pass blocking, 3rd in run blocking. One starter back, it's John Hofer. That means you're relying on incumbent rotational guys like Chad Schuster, Adam Vandervest. Not a lot to be said there. Transfers, you do have Raheem Anderson from Michigan, Zach Vaughn from Wake Forest, and Hunter Whitenack from Illinois. I don't think it gels immediately in week 1. These are actually reasonable transfers for the MAC. Just you're playing Michigan State week 1. Don't even know if they're all going to start here. And you still have some other places to fill. Defense, this is where I think the separation really happens. Michigan State was 100th last year. They do lose their 2 best players, Charles Brantley and Jordan Turner, but you still have Jalen Thompson, who is very good off the edge. You do need some transfers to step up, like Enulu Lafelle from Wisconsin, David Santiago from Air Force, but Quindarius Dunnigan's back. The interior is full of transfers. You do have some other players that need to be maximized, like Grady Kelly from Florida State needs to round this out and actually play up to his expectation because Ben Roberts, Alex Van Sumeren, and Derek Simmons were decent. So there is a bit of a ceiling on the defensive line if your transfers can just level up the incumbents a little bit. The linebacker room, I think, is pretty strong. Jordan Hall, Darius Snow, Wayne Matthews are all back. They should be better if they can stay healthier. All those guys had at least 200 snaps last year. The secondary, probably going to come down to transfers as well. Malcolm Bell from UConn, Najee Burt from Eastern Illinois, Dontavius Nash from East Carolina, Josh Eaton from Texas State. Not one of those guys comes from an elite program, but again, this unit was 124th in coverage last year. There's not enough room for them to be much worse. And as far as this matchup goes, I'm not really worried about the secondary. Western is going to try to run the ball with their dual threat quarterbacks. They already were trying to do that previously. So we'll see if they have success. I don't really buy it. And then on the Western Michigan defense, 111th last year. Their best unit was their pass rush at 93rd. They only returned 3 of their top 12 players. They lost most of their defensive line. They lost studs Corey Walker and Mason Nelson. They also lost their best defensive back. Bilal Coney left. So you've got Popeye Williams, Roddy McGraw on the edge. They're fairly experienced. You do have a couple low-level transfers coming in. The interior is just so much weaker. Tyson Lee, Marcel Tyler were disappointing players last year, so you're really relying on development. There's not a lot of transfers on the interior. The linebacker room is brand new. Dominic Moon's 113 snaps lead this group. Transfers do not project even as G5 level players. So that's tough against Michigan State. Secondary is 2 starters back. Tate Halleck was solid. Aaron Walford was atrocious at safety. And then you're immediately getting to transfers and low-level transfers like Marvin Smith, Alabama A&M, Jordan Thomas, Eastern Kentucky. This defense is atrocious. And there's a chance they just get absolutely smothered by Michigan State here. So what do both teams want to do? Western wants to run the ball. I will say, last thing on them, they have played relatively well against better competition. We saw them stay in some games last year, but then get blown out in others. We'll see on this. They're just at such a talent disadvantage here. We actually make this outside the number of 21, not by a lot. At this point, a lot of juice has been squeezed out of this, but we're looking more at a 22 and a half, kind of in no man's land for this number. It's a Michigan State or pass for us, and this is one we would probably just wait until a little bit later in the season to take positions on these two teams. Second game is Kennesaw State versus Wake Forest. What a barn burner we have here. A lot of change. The spread is 17.5 in favor of Wake Forest, a 51.5 total. Kennesaw State, new head coach. It's Jerry Mack. He was just the Jacksonville Jaguars RB coach. His OC is Mitch Militello from Tennessee. He was an analyst. He's been under that Heupel system for a long time now, and he's one of the best recruiters they had at Tennessee. So expecting some changes that more mirror the Tennessee offense. New DC is Mark Mattioli, who was the Paris Musketeers head coach from 2023 to 2024. I believe that's a European football thing. So overall, Kennesaw State, last year, they were very run heavy, 39.9% pass rate. We're expecting this to increase. We're also expecting them to use more tempo. That has been a staple of Tennessee. Last year, Kennesaw State was 108th in pace. I still think they'll be fairly run heavy, but I think the tempo could increase for this team. Wake Forest, another seismic change. Jake Dickert from Washington State comes over as head coach. He was 23-20 out there. His new OC is Rob Ezel from South Alabama. Had a lot of success with Gio Lopez in that unit. Defensive coordinator is Scotty Hazelton, who comes over after working as an assistant with Texas last year. He was the Michigan State defensive coordinator from 2020 to 2023 with kind of middling success. The changes for Wake Forest, last year they had a 50% pass rate. That will probably drop. You look at South Alabama's offense, they were right around 47% pass rate. And then pace of play. Wake Forest ran the slow mesh last year, but they were very up-tempo, 18th in pace. South Alabama was at 26.9 seconds per play. That's below average. As far as injuries go, very little reporting on Kennesaw State. I imagine we'll just have to wait for some pregame. Wake Forest, they did have Jacob Dennison and Roger Tialavea leave the team. Those are two offensive linemen, both transfers coming in, both expected to start. Now, neither of them was pretty good, especially Tialavea. So you actually got a power rankings upgrade by just putting in younger incumbent players, other transfers. But that's very volatile. These are still experienced players. Now you're looking at freshmen, redshirt freshmen, sophomores in the 2D, players that maybe aren't ready to play quite, not as experienced. So as far as week one goes, don't love that for Wake Forest, but it's still ACC team versus Conference USA. Let's get to player personnel. Kennesaw actually got a pretty good quarterback transfer in Dexter Williams from Georgia Southern in Indiana. He should start here. He's 6'1", 210. He has a 47% completion percentage through his career for 6.4 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns, 2 picks, but only 5 big-time throws, 1 turnover-worthy play. Pretty solid. Yards per carry of 4 in his career. He does need to cut back on the sacks, but this is a guy that did have an ACL that kind of derailed his career early with Indiana. He's just the most talented quarterback to walk through Kennesaw State's door, and I don't know how long. With Wake Forest, they're going to start Robbie Ashford, the South Carolina transfer. Kind of know who he is. He's a big rushing QB, 6'2", 220, former 4-star, but hasn't lived up to that. As far as passing goes, 52% completion, 6.7 yards per attempt, 20 turnover-worthy plays of 15 big-time throws. His best skill is his mobility, 4.8 yards per carry through his career, 21.5% pressure to sack ratio. All that's fine when you're running a limited offense and you're playing Kennesaw State. I wouldn't be surprised if Deshaun Purdy, the Charlotte transfer, has a couple snaps here and there, but I think this is largely Ashford's job, and it's without a doubt edge Wake Forest in the quarterback room. Skill position players got to be the same. You have very low-level transfers at Kennesaw State. At running back, Coleman Bennett from Rice, Chase Belcher from West Georgia. Not the best. In the receiver room, you actually bring back a fair amount of production. Christian Moss, Gabriel Benyard, Tykeem Wallace, and Neville Dean. But that unit, no one had more than 289 yards. Is this really something to write home about? Maybe. Davis Bryson was atrocious at quarterback. In fact, he's playing wide receiver now. So maybe just changing to a actual FBS level QB will elevate these receivers. It's not a weak unit, but I don't really know if you could talk about a ceiling with them in general, considering it's Kennesaw State. With Wake Forest, 4-star Damon Claiborne's back at running back. He had over 1,000 yards last year. completely fine. He forced 45 missed tackles. He didn't fumble once. So on top of being efficient, he's also doing the dirty work, and he's kind of a coach's dream. When you have a guy that never fumbles, he's not going to leave the field. The wide receivers look a lot different, but again, this offense is probably just going to be different entirely. It's not the most wide receiver-friendly scheme anymore. They retain four-star Micah Mays Jr. He caught 16 balls last year. Needs to take a step forward. You also bring in transfers, highlighted by Carlos Hernandez. He's previously in this Washington State scheme. He had 397 yards on 31 catches. Rest is fairly low level. Karate Brenson from Tennessee State, Chris Barnes from Washington State, Sterling Burkhalter from Cincinnati. I'm interested to see how this looks. It's not the most talented unit, but they're still significantly more talented than Kennesaw. And the offensive line, Wake Forest going to take a huge step back. On top of, replacing just about everybody, the only player who's back is George Sell. A bunch of their transfers just left. You lost Dennison. You lost Tia Lavea. Who are we putting into this unit? Devin Kalani is the only one who projects above average on the entire offensive line. But I'm not sure Wake Forest can take advantage of that. Kennesaw State, I'm not sure they can take advantage of that. When you pivot to their defense, last year they were 87th. They lose a lot. A few contributors in the secondary, 2 on the defensive line, 1 linebacker. The edge group has some experience with Jamar Rux and Wandarian Silas, but neither was particularly good. So experience, not talent. You bring in Marcus Patterson. He's a below-average transfer from Western Kentucky. The interior is a little better with Adam Watkins, Tylen Dunlap, and Jaden Grimes. They played in a rotation, all a little above average in Conference USA. Again, this is the ACC. Linebacker Baron Hobson's back after injury. Danellis Johnson's back too. They were both pretty good. Secondary, you have 2 solid starters in Jericho Washington Jr., Tyler Hallam. But at safety, a little bit of an issue with Mylan Jones struggling. They do add 7 defensive back transfers. Some of them are pretty good. Cody Jones from Memphis. Isaiah Thomas from Miami. The defense is probably a little bit improved, actually, just with better help, as long as they can stand up front. I still don't think they could take advantage of this Wake Forest offensive line. At best, I think maybe you can cause disruption a fraction of the time. Stop the run a fraction of the time. There's just a big talent gap. And then as far as the Kennesaw State offensive line, 129th in pass blocking, 101st in run blocking. They have two starters back. They were actually 2 of the better ones in Seaburn Hines and JT Pennington. 9 transfers round out this group. Not a single one projects as average. It's a combination of experienced disasters in Jadarius Lee or just low-level FCS guys like Josiah Chenault. Elijah Zollicoffer from Arkansas State highlights this group. That's not saying a lot. As far as Wake Forest defense, 58th last year. They lost their entire starting defensive line, 1 linebacker and 2 in the secondary. The defensive line did rotate a little bit last year. So B.J. Williams and Zach Lohavichin, excuse me, what a hard name to say. I don't even think I'm saying it right. Going back to the Wake Forest video, I remember having to practice that pronunciation, and I didn't do my due diligence here, so excuse me. But on top of those 2, Gabe Kershke comes in from Colorado State. Newer Gotkuth comes in from Colorado State. Those are defensive transfers, but the defensive line is still an issue, especially at defensive tackle. Linebacker room, you have 2 studs back in Quincy Bryant and Dylan Hazen. That's awesome. Secondary, Devon Patterson and Nick Anderson are your 2 main contributors. Corner is going to be a transfer job with Lardarius Webb from South Alabama, Karan Prunty from NC A&T, and Assad Williams from North Alabama. Up front, they're better than the secondary, I think. You just can't really rely on 2 FCS transfers at Wake Forest. The problem is Kennesaw State trying to run the ball. That's the strength of Wake Forest defense. You're at an extreme talent disadvantage regardless. I'm just not really sure how they're able to get a lot done in this game. Well, I will say it's 2 teams changing regimes entirely, adding a lot of uncertainty to this. The spread we currently have is about Wake Forest minus 20, 20.5. So I think there is a little bit of value on the Wake Forest side, not enough for me to take a strong position. If you did want to do something else, I think under on the total is something you could look at. Again, we're expecting kind of a change in pace for both teams. Kennesaw getting a little faster, Wake getting much slower. But overall, efficiency-wise on both sides of the ball, Kennesaw, I'm not sure is going to be able to move the offense against this Wake Forest defense. And conversely, Kennesaw State's defense is not a complete disaster. So maybe Wake Forest with the new scheme has a little bit of issues, especially considering that offensive line has some major problems too. So I will lean under, will lean Wake Forest, not ones we will play. Next up, we have a fun game here. App State versus Charlotte. This is a 6.5-point spread in favor of the road team. Over under sitting at 50.5. So two teams changing a lot. Again, App State, new head coach, it's Del Loggins. He's coming over after working as the South Carolina OC. He's kind of been run out of a bunch of rooms after coordinating lackluster offenses. So he's kind of an immediate weird hire. He's going to call plays here as well. DJ Smith is the defensive coordinator. He was the co-DC of Missouri last year. Charlotte hires Tim Albin, who's had incredible success with Ohio. On top of just bringing them to new heights last year, he's also had staying power in a conference that's ravaged by transfers, very low recruiting level, and he's been able to rebuild them year over year. Last year, Ohio lost almost everybody heading into the year. A lot of people thought they would finish towards the bottom of the conference, myself included, and a lot of people were wrong, myself included. Tim Albin is a talent developer, and now he takes a slight step up in terms of caliber of program. Todd Fitch is his OC. He was an analyst for Ohio State last year. And then you have a couple other defensive guys listed as co-DCs with continuity. The staff seems pretty good to me. As far as changes, Appalachian State last year, they had a 51% pass rate that was 39th. Under Del Loggins, he's really morphed his offenses to player personnel. With Sellers last year, they were at a 41% pass rate. Before that, they were at a 55.5. We can say they're probably going to be a little above average in terms of pace. They were each of the last 2 years. The only real thing to mention with App State is there are some rumors floating around that Kanye Roberts, the stud running back, is out for the year. Reporting's really bad on App State, just not a real full-time dedicated beat writer. So we'll have to probably wait until game time to see whether that's true. With Charlotte, last year they passed 49% of the time. That was 59th. Expecting this to drop. Ohio was around a 39.5% pass rate and then 46.5 the last 2 years. We know, going to some other different players like Todd Fitch with Ohio State, they were not the pass heaviest scheme. And I don't know if your player personnel really lends itself to that, but we'll see on that. As far as pace goes for Charlotte, they were 26.7 seconds per play. That was 75th. Ohio was one of the slowest teams in the entire country. And Ohio State was slow last year too. So we're looking at 29.4 seconds per play, 29.2, expecting a big drop in pace for Charlotte. As far as the player personnel goes, you have A.J. Swan coming in for App State. He won the starting job over J.J. Cole. Both of these guys are former four-stars that have disappointed. Swan's played with LSU, Vanderbilt. His career completions, 56%, 6.9 yards per attempt, 22 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 25 big-time throws, 23 turnover-worthy plays, not mobile whatsoever. And then on the other side, you have Connor Harrell getting named the starter over Grayson Loftus. Harrell's from North Carolina. Loftus was from Duke. Neither's played a lot. Harrell has a 61.5% completion on 70 attempts. That ends up being 8 yards per attempt, but he does have 3 big-time throws, 3 turnover-worthy plays. Somewhat mobile, 3 yards per carry for him. Pressure to sack ratio did improve last year when he was in there briefly. The only thing I'll really say is we have more experience with A.J. Swan. He's of a 4-star caliber, and he played in the SEC. Whereas Harrell had a hard time winning quarterback jobs in the ACC. North Carolina is a little bit stronger at quarterback than a lot of teams in that conference. But I still have to give a slight edge from an experience standpoint and level of competition standpoint to A.J. Swan. I don't feel confident in it. As far as the skill position players, I think on paper you have an edge for App State. This is assuming Kanye Roberts is not hurt. He averaged 5.7 yards per carry in 2023. He was banged up last year, so that's been a consistent issue for him. But I will say they're pretty deep. If Roberts is out, Rashad Dubinian comes in from Arkansas. Khalifa Keith comes in from Tennessee. 2 quality transfers at the running back position. Wide receiver, you lose a ton, and you lose some really good players like Caden Robinson. The only player you return of consequence is Dalton Stroman, who had 307 yards. They do bring in Davion Dozier from Arkansas and Jaden Barnes from Austin Peay. But it's a pretty weak group of receivers. They're going to need to rely on the run game, it seems. As far as Charlotte goes, on offense just in general, they lost all but 2 players in their top 18 in terms of snaps. That's 16 of your top 18. One of them is wide receiver Sean Brown, who was second on the team in receiving with 470 yards. That's good. They also returned Justin Olson, the former North Carolina receiver who was out with injury. Getting ahead of myself. So you kind of have two receivers with some experience. Olson's well-traveled. He had 450 yards with Middle Tennessee in 2023. So he's been all over the place, but formerly of North Carolina. Then you get in some decent players, I think. Like Adam Hopkins is still here. He's a former 4-star. Jaden McGowan from Boston College. Tyre Brooks from Arizona. The receiving core is not horrible. And then you actually have Joey Barron's the top of the tight end depth chart. I think that's okay, not the craziest. Running back, you lose a lot of your contributors, but you do bring in Cameron Smith from Western Illinois. CJ Stokes is still here from Michigan, too. The unit edge goes to App State, but I don't think it's by a lot. And that's a common theme with a lot of these positions. We talked about A.J. Swan. I think on paper he's a little better than Harrell, but can we say that with confidence? No. Can we say the App State position group is better than Charlotte's? I think you could argue it, but I don't have a strong argument. On paper, that's the way we have it, but it's close. Offensive line's kind of the same thing. App State was 94th in pass blocking. They're losing 4 starters. They do have a pair of guards that actually played a bit in Jaden Ramsey and Griffin Scroggs. 5 transfers come in. 4 of them are atrocious. The only one who projects above average is Trent Ramsey from Cal. Tackles are going to be a mess. They're low-level transfers. Low-level transfers. Expecting an average to below average outcome for App State, that's what we have. Charlotte last year was 30th in pass blocking, 78th in run blocking. They do bring back Johnny King at center. He's solid. And they bring in transfer Jesse Ramel from Michigan State. He's solid. But like App State, the rest of the transfers are really low level. They're going to see a drop if younger players don't step up. But there's not a significant advantage one way or the other. Numerically, we make this an edge towards App State, but the slightest of edges. And then on defense is kind of where the edges evaporate. App State 89th overall last year. They were returning 6 starters, but they lost a ton of their depth pieces. They rotated a lot last year. So you have Thomas Davis and Sean Collins back on the edge. They're a good tandem, but inside is completely gutted. You're going to have to rely on transfers. Rondo Porter from South Carolina is the only one who's not FCS or G5. So the interior, you're probably going to be able to be run on. At linebacker, they returned Kyle Arnholt, but he was horrible. You've got nothing else. Ronnie Porter from South Carolina, Brayshawn Littlejohn from Missouri, Brooks Urachek from Arkansas need to step up immediately. A lot of those come from solid programs, but no experience. And with that said, like Porter from South Carolina, Urachek from Arkansas, these are like walk-ons, 0-star recruits. It's not like we're talking about former 3-stars that come down to this linebacker room. This is not a good linebacker room. Secondary, they returned 1 solid player in Ethan Johnson. They returned 1 decent player in DJ Burks. Rest of this is transfer heavy. Jaden McBurrows from Michigan, I think, is solid. Emory Floyd from South Carolina and Dylan Haas from Arkansas. They're a decent secondary. Those are 3-stars. So I think you do have a pretty decent secondary on the back end. It's up front that I think is a little more concerning with App State, particularly that linebacker unit. As far as Charlotte goes, they were 123rd in defense, so only 3 of their contributors are back. The D-line is entirely new. Some of these players are really low level. Some of them are okay, like Joro Liverpool, Braden Mullen coming from Dartmouth. Those are the players that have like some accolades, but you need to rely on the jumping competition. Then you bring in players like Curtis Simpson from North Carolina, Jamarian Solomon from FIU, Maceo Williams from Utah State. Those are the more, as far as recruiting goes, the higher caliber players, not as experienced. With that said, on the defensive line, not expecting them to be much worse than App State. And then they get better on the back end. The linebacker room, Shea Taylor from Ohio, Gavin Willis from Bucknell. Secondary, you have Trevion McGee back, Jaquarius Conley. Transfers come in, Caleb Curtin from Elon, Thy Baldwin from Ball State, and Gavin Shipman from Harvard. It's the same thing here. App State maybe has the more talented players. On defense, I don't even think you can really argue that. I think it's very, very close. And the whole story with both of these teams is the talent margin is not wide enough for this to be a touchdown in favor of the road team. It's moved to 6.5. But also give the coaching advantage to Charlotte with Tim Albin coming in. Will he have this ready by week 1? Honestly, he's had Ohio turned over in less time. So I think there's a reasonable expectation that this could be the case. But yeah, defense for both teams going to be largely turnover driven, or excuse me, a lot of turnover, which is transfer driven. But overall, you have slight advantage Charlotte there. Offense, slight advantages App State across the board. With home field coming in favor of Charlotte and coaching advantage as well. We'll happily take 6.5 points. I think you could debate this on the money line. Wouldn't be shocked if Charlotte wins this game outright. Now we get to the meat of the schedule. Auburn takes on Baylor. It's a 2.5-point spread in favor of Auburn. The total in the game sitting at 57 points. This is a really fun one, the best game of the day, in my opinion. Same coaching staff on both teams, same coordinators. Hugh Freeze is 11 and 14 so far. Dave Aranda is 31 and 30. Both of these coaches are right on the hot seat. Whoever loses this game is going to be in a tough spot. Auburn looks like they're getting healthier. Antonio Coleman suspended on the defensive line, but they're basically everyone who's been banged up is projected to return. Last year, they had a 49% pass rate that was 57th. They were 41st in pace. Baylor last year was 47.5% pass rate. That was 67th. They were 17th in pace. So expecting a lot of continuity there. As far as injuries go, Auburn hasn't reported a lot. They seem to be getting healthier. Baylor has a couple players out. Dawson Pendergrass is out for the year. Michael Turner, one of their 4-star freshmen, is not going to play in this game. Carl Williams, defensive back, is doubtful. He's about an average starter for them, so nothing crazy. Quarterback. I think you have to give the edge to Baylor just slightly. Mississippi State transfer Sawyer Robertson started the last 11 games. Honestly, my biggest concern is that this team evaluated him versus DeQuan Finn in the preseason last year and thought DeQuan Finn gave them the best chance to win. That I'll never be able to forget that, but still, you can't argue with what Robertson did at the end of the year. 62.5% completion, 8.3 yards per attempt, 28 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. The real concern is 15 big-time throws to 16 turnover-worthy plays. But he's still 6'4", 220, some mobility. He only took 16 sacks, too. That was a 16.5% pressure rate. 3.7 yards per carry. You mix all that up, and you get him as the 43rd most efficient QB in college football last year. What I think you're getting with Robertson is a solid floor. I still have a little concern with the ceiling, and I think there is some volatility to his game. The problem is when you look to Auburn, you're living on hopes and dreams. Jackson Arnold, former 5-star, comes in. He was the 91st most efficient QB last year. There's no way around it. The play was bad. 1,400 yards. That was 5.8 yards per attempt, 62.5% completion, 7 big-time throws, 8 turnover-worthy plays. I will say the infrastructure around him was atrocious. A lot of starters on the offensive line went down. His top 6 wide receivers went down. He was working with nothing. And they changed the offense a little bit. They started just running him right into the back of the O-line. 3 yards per carry. Teams just loaded the box on him, got pressure right away. The infrastructure is better with Auburn. So can we see him live up to that 5-star potential, the potential we saw in the bowl game in 2023? And I think the answer is probably closer to yes than no. The infrastructure is just so much better. Yeah, Jarquez Hunter's gone at running back, but you get back 4-star Damari Ellison. He's returned from injury. Jeremiah Cobb is here at running back. Those players haven't played a lot, but they've flashed on small samples, and they're good recruits. The wide receiver room, I mean, you get Cam Coleman in year 2. He should take a step forward after 598 yards last year. Eric Singleton comes in from Georgia Tech. Wildly productive. Nearly 1,500 yards combined the last 2 years, 2.3 yards per route. Your wide receiver 3 is going to be some combination of Horatio Fields, who's a veteran from Wake Forest, or 4-star sophomore Malcolm Simmons. Plus you get Preston Howard from Maryland. I mean, it's just way better. Not to mention the offensive line was 58th in pass blocking, 42nd in run blocking. They're returning 4 starters, including a stud center and Connor Liu. You added Xavier Chaplin from Virginia Tech to fill the void. The depth is good here. This offensive line is, you're going from a bottom 3 unit to maybe a top 5 unit. Won't quite say top 3. So right away, expecting Arnold to be better because of what's around him. As far as Baylor goes, the offense is not really a question for me. Even with Pendergrass going down at running back, Bryson Washington's a stud, over 1,000 yards and 22 catches. Not to mention, they brought in 2 4-star running back freshmen, so I think they'll be okay, especially in a one-game situation. And wide receiver's fine. Josh Cameron's back. He had 52 catches for 754 yards last year. They luckily got Ashton Hawkins clearance after they thought he might not be eligible. He was a good wide receiver too. Nearly 2 yards per attempt for him. The transfers, I think, are fine. Kobe Prentice is kind of an underachiever with Alabama. Cole Wilson, the exact opposite, a high-level achiever in the G5 with Texas State. Not to mention Michael Trigg had 30 catches for nearly 400 yards. Baylor's offense should be just fine. The question for me with Baylor is, can they upgrade their defense? This is, I don't understand, man. Like, this is Aranda's specialty. They have good talent. They were 103rd in defense last year. They were okay against the run. They were pitiful in coverage. But now you're losing 4 of your top 5 defensive linemen, 1 linebacker, and 3 of your starters in the secondary. So you basically go to the portal right away at the edge. Marion Winston from Oregon, Matthew Fobbs-White from Tulane. Okay. Inside, Jackie Marshall does return after an elite season, but then you're immediately turning to younger 4-stars in Kamari Morgan and Alex Foster. Okay, they're young. Linebacker, Keaton Thomas is back after a solid year, but then you're going to the transfer portal. Trevion Barnes from FIU and Phoenix Jackson from Fresno State. They're probably going to have to play. And then in the secondary, we mentioned 3 guys back. Caden Jenkins, I guess, is the best one, but one of them's hurt. We already mentioned Carl Williams is probably going to be out of this game. So now you're turning immediately to transfers. All right, what does that look like? Devin Turner from Northwestern, he was good in the Big Ten. Tyler Turner from Oregon, Calvin Simpson-Hunt from Ohio State. They're 4-stars, but they're not proven. The bottom line kind of with this unit is there's a lot of talent on paper. They've been recruiting defense just fine. They have 4-stars. They have not maximized it. Is this a Dave Aranda problem? Allegedly, he's going to focus more on the defense this year. They need to step up, and they're going to need to step up against Auburn. But right now, you're kind of just living on hopes and dreams. As far as the Auburn defense, I have a lot fewer concerns here. This unit was awesome last year, 19th overall. They do lose a bit. Jalen McLeod is gone, but man, defensive line still awesome. Keldrick Falk is, like in the top 5 in terms of prospects for next year's draft class, top 10. You're seeing him littered across mock drafts. He's coming off a crazy season. Kieran Crawford, Quinchell Jamison Travis, and Malik Blockton sort of round out a good defensive line. And then they bring in some reinforcements, younger 4-stars, Chris Murray from Sam Houston. The defensive line's good. The linebacker room, they're brand new. DeMarcus Riddick's the most experienced with 239 snaps, but you get a lot of young players that are 4-stars. Like, on top of Riddick, Woodyard, J.J. Falk, those are 4-stars. I mean, this is a talented unit. You also bring in Caleb Wheatland from Maryland. In the secondary, you have 4 starters that have experience. Kayan Lee, Jay Crawford, Caleb Harris are the best ones. But then you also have young 4-stars across the board. Rayon Strader comes in from Miami, Ohio. I mean, just like every loss, they patched it with either a young 4-star, and then if they can't develop quick enough, there's like some stopgap transfer. Rayon Strader from Miami, Ohio. Chris Murray from Sam Houston State. No, those guys don't project as all SEC first-team players, but if you need to just bridge a gap between a 4-star freshman or sophomore, or redshirt freshman, using one of these players from a low level that started, I think that's fine. Auburn's defense is better than Baylor's. Overall, there are a lot of edges Auburn's direction. They're just not drastic to me, and there's a couple things I'll mention with Auburn as we talk about this game. They're on the road here. Don't love that. This team has not been the best coached. Hugh Freeze has drawn a lot of criticism for good reason. I think at some point, like the hot seat stuff makes sense. The only thing that keeps me leaning Baylor's direction is the talent on this defense. If Dave Aranda can maximize this, and if he had done that at all in the past, I would be betting Baylor in this spot. But right now, the coaching problems that both teams have had over the last few years just leads me to pass in this game. I think over 57.5 is fine. I do respect Auburn's defense in particular, but Baylor's offense is probably strong enough to put some points up. On the other side, I still don't really respect Baylor's defense until they show it to me, and I think Auburn's offense is going to be significantly improved. Really, Auburn's offense was fine last year. It's just if you take the Peyton Thorne turnover-worthy plays that turned into interceptions where he actually ran wildly bad, you had receivers volleyball setting stuff to defenders. It was a disaster. But if you clean that up, Auburn's offense was actually fairly efficient, and they should have made a bowl. So I'm sort of leaning Baylor's direction. I feel really bad about that. Not confident at all. Might honestly change the pick to Auburn. The better lean for me is the over 57.5 if you want to go there. I think pace is just fine. Second of our big games is Georgia Tech taking on Colorado. 4-point spread in some spots. It's moved out to 5. This is where I played it at the 5 once it moved there. You have a 52 total in the game. So this is being played at elevation, of course. A lot of changes, especially with Colorado. A few changes with Georgia Tech, largely on the defensive side of the ball. Brent Key's the head coach. Buster Faulkner's really made his bones as the OC. I mean, he's probably going to be a head coach next year. I'm surprised they were able to keep him. They go out and hire Blake Gideon as defensive coordinator. He was the Texas safeties coach last year. With Colorado, continuity on the staff. Dion has resurrected this program from the depths, regardless of what you think about him. They were the worst P4 team in the country before he got there. The big changes for them are player personnel, and immediately that sort of stems to your coaching staff because, like Pat Shermer's your OC. Last year, they were running passes 60.5% of the time. That was third in the country. They were playing with a seconds per play of 25.2. That was 43rd. We're expecting them to slow down a little bit, and we're expecting them to be run heavier, using more play action, stuff that Salter was thriving at with Liberty. So expected to be a little different from Colorado. And then really the only injury in the game, Dallin Hayden is expected to miss the first few weeks of the season at running back for Colorado. That's a position of weakness for them, so I'm not super concerned anyway. Georgia Tech looks fairly healthy. You get to the player personnel. Haynes King, he gets the quarterback edge in this game. 17th most efficient QB last year. Very mobile, 4.7 yards per carry. 8 big-time throws, 3 turnover-worthy plays. He was hurt for part of the year, but his completion percentage was at 73%, 7.9 yards per attempt. The biggest problem with King is he's been injured a lot. It's week 1, so should be pretty good on that front. As far as Colorado goes, Caden Salter comes in from Liberty. He's now battling the 4-star freshman Julian Lewis. They've both been expected to see playing time this year, but they're very tight-lipped on their plans for this game. Salter is originally a 4-star with Tennessee. He took a slight step back last year with Liberty in terms of passing. His 2023 season was incredible. Last year, he was at 56% completion percentage, 7.2 yards per attempt, 19 big-time throws, 14 turnover-worthy plays. Still very mobile, 5.1 yards per carry, but he's drawn some criticism for, like an unwillingness to get hit in some big plays, where you need to pick up yardage to get your team maybe a first down or something. The only other thing with Salter that needs to be mentioned, his wide receivers dropped 11.5% of his passes. He was not getting a lot of favors from his pass catchers. That was one of the highest rates in the country. And overall, he finished as the 29th most efficient quarterback, even in a step back from 2023. You do have to jump up to the Big 12 here, but Salter, I think, is a fine replacement, even if he's going to split a series here and there with Lewis, the 4-star freshman. I don't think the drop-off is immense between Haynes King and Salter. It is there, but it's not crazy. Skill position players, Georgia Tech's loaded. Jamal Haynes is back. He rushed for 944 yards last year, 5.6 yards per carry, 28 catches, over 2,000 rushing yards combined in the last 2 seasons. Wide receiver, they lose Eric Singleton, but they return Malik Rutherford first and foremost. He was at nearly 2 yards per route run, 700 yards receiving. He was over 2 yards per route run, 2.35. That was awesome. And then to fill the void left by Singleton, they bring in Eric Rivers and Dean Patterson, the top 2 receivers from FIU. Rivers in particular had 3.57 yards per route, over 1,100 yards. And then Patterson had 50 catches himself. They also returned 4-star sophomore Isaiah Canyon, and Brett Seither's back at injury from tight end. This skill position group is loaded. The offensive line is where things start to fall apart for Georgia Tech for me. This unit was very good last year. They only returned Joe Fusil and Keelan Rutledge, and their transfers and recruits are a little underwhelming to me. Andrew Rosinski from North Carolina, Will Reed from Princeton, and Malachi Carney from South Alabama. They're going to take a step back. I trust this coaching staff. They still should be above average, but this unit was awesome last year. There's just no way you can get around losing this much talent and bringing in this little and get away with it. We'll see. As far as, what they match up against Colorado's defense, this is one of the first main misconceptions, I think, for this Colorado team. People think of them as just like this shootout team. But last year, their defense kept them in a lot of games. And if you look towards the end of the season, they were not scoring as much points. They were defending teams very well, not allowing as many points. They were 33rd overall. And part of that, having Travis Hunter helps. They were 13th in coverage. He erased one side of the field, basically. They're turning over a lot of the defense now. The players they lose, the studs are Travis Hunter, BJ Green, and Chidozie Nwankwo. But they do have some quality players back. The edge group, Arden Walker and Samuel Okunlola, both played well above average last year. The defensive tackle position has Amari McNeil, who is about average. They bring in Jaheim Otis from Alabama, high-profile transfer. The camp reports haven't been glowing, but still, he was playing on the Alabama defensive line, playing significant time. He was rotationally wanted to step up, playing time-wise, and they'll get it probably, but man, Colorado's not seen a lot of those guys walk through the door. Tavian Coleman comes in from Texas State. Defensive line should be good. Linebacker, I think, is a big question. They're relying on low-level transfers like Reginald Hughes from Jacksonville State and Martavis French from UTSA. That's my biggest concern with their defense. Secondary, I think, will still be pretty good. DJ McKinney and Carter Stoutmeyer were above average. Preston Hodge was about average. Transfers are decent. Tawfiq Bayard from USF, Tiresias Davis from Wyoming are the headliners, but you do have some former four-stars looking for a change of scenery like Makari Vickers from Oklahoma. The defense is wildly underrated from a talent perspective. They do need coaching to sort of bring this together, but they've received that in the last couple of years with this staff. So I'm not all that concerned with it. I do think Georgia Tech gets theirs in offense, but they're going to meet some resistance. As far as Colorado offensively, I also think their skill position group is a little underrated. Isaiah Augustave is gone at running back. Dallin Hayden's hurt. Michael Welch was just fine, 4.3 yards per carry. He was the most efficient back they had. They were terrible running the ball, and they're probably not going to be a whole lot better this year unless Salter really opens some lanes, which he could. A lot of times dual threat quarterbacks do that. But overall, Welch is more of like an average player to me than anything crazy we want to write home about. Wide receiver, they lose Travis Hunter, LeJontay Wester, Will Shepard, and Jimmy Horn. Almost no way they live up to expectations, at least 2024 there. But man, this team is loaded with elite players. They're all young, but I mean, we're talking about Draylon Miller, Omarion Miller, two former four-stars who have already produced. Connell Farha Khan, Quintel Gibson, and Cam Mickle, three incoming four-stars. Joseph Williams, he was a breakout freshman for Tulsa last year. Former five-star Hakeem Williams is sort of this rehabilitation project. I mean, we're talking like 7 deep at the wide receiver room with elite recruiting pedigrees, all of them very young, of course, nothing proven. But you're telling me we can't find 3 starting receivers out of this group? We'll see, but this unit is better than people are saying. It's just unproven. And then the offensive line. People like to blame them for the problems with Shedeur Sanders last year taking the sacks. I think it's kind of a two-way street. The offensive line was 52nd in pass blocking, 77th in run blocking. By no means an elite unit, still a little above average. And then Sanders held the ball for a long time. So it's not purely a Sanders, purely an offensive line thing. What we can say moving forward to this year is they have 4 starters back. Jordan Seaton is a former 5-star thrown into the fire immediately. And he played okay. Kareem Harden and Phillip Houston also above average. Then you have 9 transfers. Xavier Hill from Memphis, Aki Ogunbayi from Texas A&M, Cooper Lovelace from Northwestern, Zion Chrysler from Illinois, Zarian McGill from Louisiana Tech. A couple of those players are in competition. I think that's a good thing. You have high-level elite recruits, maybe that didn't have the role they wanted, versus some G5 producers that are coming up. Should be a good offensive line for Colorado. And then the problem with Georgia Tech last year was their defense. They were constantly in shootouts. They could score with teams like Georgia, but they couldn't stop them. 98th in total defense, 106th in coverage. They do lose some players. Their top 3 defensive linemen, 1 backer, and 3 in the secondary. But they're basically relying on a coaching change, fixing a lot. And they have some talent, so I think that is in the realm of possibility. Defensive line's probably going to be mainly transfers outside of Jordan Vandenberg. He was a defensive tackle. You have A.J. Hoffler from Clemson, Ronald Triplett from UTSA, Matthew Alexander from UCF. Those are all reasonable, but this is not a defensive line full of elite talent. Not as many 4-stars, even compared to Colorado. So I think there are still problems. Linebacker, you have your heart and soul, Kyle Efford. He's the old school linebacker, with the neck roll, as expected, really limited in coverage. You have EJ Lightsey and Melvin Jordan coming in from Oregon State to kind of round out that room. It should be pretty good, above average for sure. Secondary only returns decent players like Amari Harvey, Rodney Shelley, and Omar Daniels. None of them studs, but all of them pretty good, above average. Some of the transfers need to come together, and if they do, this unit could be improved. It's just you're looking at Daquan White from Eastern Michigan. Good, but needs to jump in competition. John Mitchell from Penn State, good recruit, needs to show he can play more. Savion Riley from Colorado, Jaron Gilmer from Georgia State. That's the kind of blend we're talking about. They'll be better on defense just with better coaching, but there's absolutely some push and pull here. There's some talent that needs to be developed. This is still a unit that's a bit up for grabs for me. So to sum up the game, we did take Colorado just on the fact that this team is underrated. They're playing at elevation. Home field is a real thing. You could look at the over, I think, if you want. Georgia Tech's going to play extremely slow, especially if they lead in the game at any point. You see them go ball control, run the play clock down as far as they can. And they've run. Remember the Florida State game last year? This team will run the ball like for an entire half if they can. I don't think they'll be able to because Colorado's offense should be just fine. They're extremely talented, and their defense is underrated. I took a 5. It's not my most confident bet of the day, but it is one I think you can lay if it's out there. Next up, we get to UNLV versus Sam Houston, a pair of teams that played in week 0. I think both of them disappointed quite a bit. The spread is minus 10.5 in favor of UNLV, 61.5 total. UNLV did not cover against Idaho State, and it wasn't particularly close. The margin of victory actually should have been thinner than the actual margin of victory. We had that at 5.9 points. And Sam Houston didn't look great either. They were fortunate on a couple weird bounces, including, like a muffed punt from Western Kentucky. That margin of victory actually ended up being like 11.3. Still didn't cover, but it was a tough scene for both teams. So UNLV, it's Dan Mullen. He's the head coach, out of football for a while, came back, previously coach of Florida. His OC is Corey Dennis, previously the OC of Tulsa. And Paul Gunther is the DC. He took over after Zach Arnett resigned in the spring. So maybe that's why they had a ton of defensive problems. I don't know. Sam Houston, Phil Longo was the OC at Wisconsin. He comes over as head coach here. Sort of got ran out of Madison. Zach Patterson's the OC, but Longo's calling the plays. Freddie Autry is the defensive coordinator. He was the NC State linebackers coach. So what did we see in week 1? UNLV, 37% pass rate. They were very, very slow, nearly 29 seconds per play. Sam Houston, like we try to tell people, they did run the air raid, but it wasn't, Hawaii out there. It wasn't the run and shoot. They had a 50.8% pass rate, 25.8 seconds per play. It's kind of like we were predicting. They'll be pass heavy, but not as pass heavy as people think. They'll be fast, but not as fast as people think. Major injuries in the game. Jaheim Joseph went down for UNLV at safety. James Dawn at guard missed week 1 for Sam Houston State. Quarterback, I'm still giving the edge to UNLV, even if Anthony Colandrea vastly outproduced Alex Orji. They both played. It was 58 snaps for Colandrea, 15 for Orji. Colandrea completed 71% of his passes. The stats look amazing for both these guys. I mean, they were playing the Idaho State defense, which was essentially non-existent. The biggest concern with Colandrea, and we'll kind of blend the offensive line with this, he took 3 sacks on 11 quarterback pressures. And when you look at the offensive line stats, they allowed 6 pressures. There were 12 total pressures in the game. There are 5 pressures that fall on Colandrea's shoulders and 1 that fall on Orji's shoulders. And then you look at the time to throw. Colandrea was holding on to the ball forever. So we got to clean up these sacks and get rid of the ball quicker. I understand you probably think you can play like Pat Mahomes. You're facing an FCS team, but that needs to be cleaned up. And the offensive line is a major concern for me. They did not start a lot of players I thought they would. Center ended up being Reed Williams from Chattanooga, Malik McGowan from North Carolina at left guard. Those are the 2 predictable starters. And then they started a 0-star. Will Thomas at left tackle. He was awful, predictably. They started James Faminu from Temple at right tackle. Again, he was bad at Temple. And then they split right guard snaps. I mean, the O-line has serious concerns if this is what is going to be put out there. And the first thing I'll say on this, we do these player ratings. We try to put the best players in the starting lineup. Generally speaking, if you have a scrub play ahead of someone you projected a little bit better, what happened? Generally, that means the player that was projected to be better did not live up to expectations. It is very rare that the scrub from Temple actually overachieved and beat out the player. So what we're seeing here is there's a chance that this offensive line might be worse than we expected coming into the year, especially if like Will Thomas and Austin Boyd and these players are going to play. Will Thomas, the 0-star left tackle, I mean, him and Austin Boyd combined for 5 of the pressures allowed. So we'll see here. I'm not optimistic on the O-line. As far as how the skill position players match up in this game, I mean, they are good. Jaden Thomas had 14.7 yards per carry. We knew he was going to be good coming into the year. Jalen Glover from Utah, he's a solid transfer. Kevon Lean from Mississippi State. The running back room is deep. Jaden Bradley had 131 yards receiving. Troy O'Meara kind of disappointed. as the wide receiver 2 from Arizona State, but they're deep. They could play D'Angelo Irving. They could play Day-Day Reynolds from Pitt. They rotated a lot in this game, which makes sense. They were playing a completely inept opponent, especially on defense. Now you're playing Sam Houston. What is to be expected of their defense? They gave up over 30 points. They were a complete disaster against Western Kentucky for the most part, 7.9 yards per attempt through the air. They were solid on the ground, 3 yards per carry, but that's more of a question for me. Is that a Western Kentucky thing or is that a Sam Houston thing? Because Western Kentucky wasn't expected to have a good run game. They weren't expected to have a good offensive line. It doesn't really change my opinion. I will say the secondary didn't start a lot of surprises to me. We kind of expected them to get roasted. That's not terribly surprising. Cecil Powell from Troy, C.J. Brown from Bowling Green are the only decent players that graded out against Western Kentucky. This UNLV team has better players than Western Kentucky on offense, especially the skill players. So I'm just not super optimistic they're able to get stops, even if UNLV is a disaster on the offensive line and starting, or at least rotating quarterbacks to some degree, which I'm not sure why. As far as Sam Houston goes, Hunter Watson, after all the rumors he would split time, he got the game, 63% completion for 209 yards, 7 yards per attempt, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception, 0 big-time throws, 1 turnover-worthy play. Basically, all the success for the Sam Houston team came in the run game and using the running backs as an extension of the pass. Watson had 91 yards on the ground, 6.5 yards per attempt. And then you look at the pass catchers. How did he get his yardage? I mean, Elijah Green, the Indiana transfer running back, had 7 catches. He led the team in receiving. Alton McCaskill was the main runner. He actually was pretty good on the ground, 6.5 yards per carry. But everything came through the run game. And by extension, basically running backs in the pass game. Quavez Humphrey, Derek Bledsoe, and Avion Smith-Mack, the receivers who started the game for Sam Houston, combined for 6 catches for 48 yards. Tight end Austin Smith had 1 catch. This is incredibly disappointing for a pass game that's supposedly running the air raid. So, I mean, immediately, if you're UNLV, you're dealing with a limited Sam Houston offense. First of all, I still have concerns if Hunter Watson can run an offense based on air raid principles. And then the receiving game showed absolutely nothing against Western Kentucky, who was replacing their entire defense. They had 2 starters back. You look at the offensive line for Sam Houston, they didn't have James Dawn, which was a huge problem because they already were projected to be a complete mess. And that's exactly what happened. They gave up 14 QB pressures and 39 dropbacks. That was a 36% pressure rate. Now you're facing UNLV, who they did the same thing on defense they did on offense. I don't know why they're starting the players that are starting. Their secondary is a complete mess. On top of Jaheim Joseph getting hurt, like your best players on paper, 4-star Cody DeCambra didn't start. Former 4-star Denver Harris from UTSA last year didn't start. Instead, you start like Andrew Powdrell from Montana State. That went exactly as planned. Jake Pope, he's the one I thought maybe would step up from Georgia. It didn't work. Trey Fulton is the one that replaced Jaheim Joseph. He should be behind these players like DeCambria and Harris. The secondary was a complete disaster. Idaho State had complete success moving the ball through the air, and they're not even a top 25 FCS offense. The only player on defense who was decent was Marcel McDuffie, but the other linebacker they started was Blessing Alua Tiolomalete. They're better starting options on the team than him, at least compared to expectation. The only redeeming quality for this UNLV defense was their defensive line generated 15 quarterback pressures, and on the defensive line, they did start their best players on paper. So again, I'm not saying I know better than Dan Mullen. I will say this. If Denver Harris and Cody DeCambria can't start for this team, the secondary is worse than we expected coming into the year. These are more existential problems for UNLV in future weeks. They are playing Sam Houston this week. That's the direction I lean, minus the 10.5. The only other thing I'll say is clearly they're looking ahead to opponents. They did not take Idaho State seriously. They play UCLA next week, so I'm not sure if they're going to take this team particularly serious either. If you made me pick a side, it's UNLV minus 10.5. I'm not playing it based on that hook. You'd have to give me a 10. I would much rather have it at 9.5. But this team clearly playing with their food will pass on the run and Rebs until we see them play some of their better players in future games. Last one, Central Michigan takes on San Jose State. This is a fun game, an 11.5-point spread in favor of San Jose State. The total in the game is 51 points. A lot of exciting stuff from both these teams, a lot of change, especially on Central Michigan. Matt Drinkel takes over as head coach. He was the Army offensive line coach. He hired Jim Chaplin as his OC, who previously coordinated Eastern Washington's offense, and that was an exciting unit. Sean Cronin takes over DC, and that's about it for the changes. Central Michigan last year had a 41.5% pass rate. That was 111th. Eastern Washington, they were at 38.7, but their top two wide receivers got hurt, and they completely turned to the run after that. In 2023, they had a 50.5% pass rate. What I'm expecting in terms of passing for them is probably a little more balanced, not full air rate or anything like that, but definitely not a 45.5 or 41.5% pass rate either. In terms of pace, they also should be faster. Last year, Central Michigan was 93rd in pace. Eastern Washington ran a play every 25.9 seconds last year and 23.4 seconds the year prior. It's a much faster offense. As far as San Jose State goes, Ken Niumatalolo, I always get his name wrong, Niumatalolo. Just need to say it slow. Ken Niumatalolo, he's in year 2 now. Good start last year, 7-6. Staff is intact. Biggest concern I have with their program is their strength of schedule was absolutely putrid last year. Their best win was probably against Oregon State on the road. So, I mean, that's the hole I'll poke there. I like the coaching staff. They were first in pass rate. They were 14th in pace. Expecting this game in general to be played with a lot more pace than previous Central Michigan games, just with the changes on the coaching staff, which to me is not reflected in the total. That's where we'll go immediately before we even get to player personnel. Pace just doesn't match up. So does efficiency. With Central Michigan, you get Joe Labas taking over quarterback duties. He played in 6 games last year. He's the former Iowa QB. I'll say this, there's really nothing special about him, nothing bad either. You're kind of just betting on the infrastructure change, lifting him up, which by all means should happen. But San Jose State is the better quarterback room. Walker Egan is back. He had a good season. He had a 57% completion, 7.5 yards per attempt, only 8 turnover-worthy plays, 18 big-time throws, so he was doing a lot himself too. 99 rushing yards for 3.4 yards per carry, pressure to sack ratio of 5%. If you extrapolate his sample, he ends up being the 18th most efficient quarterback in college football. So Eget, definitely better than Labas, but I'm expecting maybe that gap to be narrower than other people expect. Skill position players should favor San Jose State. Again, Central Michigan lost their top 3 running backs. They had unproven Trey Cornish from Tulane, so not much to say there. Wide receiver room also lost a ton. Tyson Davis is back from injury after he had 444 yards in 2023. But outside of that, Tommy McIntosh is the leader with 152 snaps. Van Timmeren at tight ends, kind of inexperienced. They did it at a fullback transfer, Rusty Van Wetsinga from Iowa. So this offense may be a little funky. Kind of excited to see it. As far as San Jose State goes, they have Floyd Chalk back at running back. Good season for him. 721 yards. The one thing with this team is they don't throw to the running back a lot. They use them to pass block a ton. So the running backs never have a lot of catches. Anyway, Jabari Bates is back as running back 2. Lamar Radcliffe is 3. So deep at the running back position, they do replace a lot at receiver. Nick Nash, Justin Lockhart, and Trayshawn Hurry. Main receiver they have back is Matthew Coleman. He had 401 yards. Their transfers are Danny Scudero from Sac State, Leland Smith from Purdue, Malachi Riley from Arizona, and Mason Starling from Cal. They like to run 4 wide. Maybe they change that to a little more 11 this year. Just they don't have as much receiving depth. But they still have more than Central Michigan, so the edge goes to San Jose State. Offensive line, last year Central Michigan was 128th in pass blocking, 102nd in run blocking. Only 2 of their top 6 are back, but one of them, Brady Plusha, he's like their best player. The other one, Martin Covisto, was their worst, so they're going to need some players to step up. Jacob Russell comes in from Valpo, John Iannuzzi from Columbia. The rest of this group is going to rely on depth. They were very bad last year, so I'm not sure that depth is substantially better this year. But the only redeeming quality, I guess, is, they have Plusha back, and they were 128th in pass blocking. Well, you look on the other side, San Jose State was 130th. They were 102nd in run blocking. San Jose State was 129th. What does San Jose State have back? They have 3 returners on the O-line. None of these players were even average. Pacetti Lapuaho was arguably the worst player in FBS on the offensive line. They need coaching up, and they need it fast because they need at least 2 replacements, and they didn't add a single transfer. The offensive line is atrocious. They were decent on offense with this unit last year, so maybe they can overcome it again. But honestly, we have a slight edge to Central Michigan on the offensive line. I can tell you this, Central Michigan would not have edges over many teams in college football. As far as defense goes, Central Michigan was 50th last year. They lose a bit. They return one stud on the edge and Michael Heldman. And from there, his running mate, Cade Costas, was a mess. So one good, one bad. On the interior, they lose most of it. They bring in Joey Van Wetzinger from Iowa, Dylan Fisher from Ohio Dominican. It's just an undeveloped, under-recruited, low-level talent defensive line. They do have some studs at linebacker. Jordan Kwiatkowski and Dakota Cochran are back. The secondary, Caleb Spann is solid too. But then you get to below average play quickly with Jayon Johnson and Elijah Rickard. It's going to put a lot on transfers. Kalen Carroll from Cincinnati and Maddox Blackwell from Indiana State. Defense is bad on the defensive line of the secondary. Linebackers clearly their starting unit. I do think San Jose State can move the ball. And as far as that O-line, D-line matchup goes, Central Michigan probably gets some pressure, but I mean, it's not a terrible mismatch. So expecting San Jose State to move the ball. On the other side, you have one full-time edge back for San Jose State. The defense overall was 78th. They had a terrible pass rush, 120th. Their best unit was their coverage at 28th. So sort of an imbalanced defense. So you get one edge back in Latu. You have one rotational guy in Justin Stearns. Vili Tuafalatawa from Utah needs to step up. Sorry about that, Vili. The last name is very tough. Inside, you get Gafa Faga back after 669 snaps. I mean, overall, there's just not a lot on this defensive line. The interior is worse than the edge group, too. The linebacker room, you have two below-average starters in Noah McNeil-Franklin and Jordan Pollard. Blake Tabarachi from New Mexico comes in. Underachieving, low-level linebacker unit. The secondary is where you need some players to potentially step up because you lose DJ Harvey. He was your best player. You lose Robert Rahimi, Michael Dansby, and Amir Wallace. So you have two guys back, Ethan Powell and Isaiah Revis, with decent starting experience. Larry Turner-Gooden is a former four-star, and Caleb Presley comes in from Washington. Maliki Crawford comes in from USC. You're still probably taking a step back in the secondary, but it's not crazy. This should be a below-average defense overall, but these secondary replacements are going to dictate if this unit is, like 75th or if they're 90-something. Last year, they were 78th, so right around average, and they do lose their best players, so that's a concern for me. Regardless, I think Central Michigan can move the ball with their faster pace and new offense against this San Jose State defense that has a lot of questions. We play the over at 51. First of all, pace of play gets there, and then we have the offenses slightly ahead of the defenses on both sides, which should be able to get this over 51. You're right at a key number there, so I prefer the 51 over anything else. Try to find that. But that is where we will stand. But overall, that'll do it for us today. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you have any feedback or what you think of these teams, disagree, agree, whatever. It helps a lot if you do that. So thank you. And until next time, we'll see you guys later. Probably back again tomorrow. We'll talk Saturday's games. Until then, good luck.